think there needs to be some sort of recognition of the work done. Yes, they do have an obligation to do it. That's part of their job, but we need to recognize that. Letting it go without payment means we're undervaluing ourselves. Goodwill don't pay the bills.
Yeah. Let's reflect on how the disparity between pay. I think it's often quoted is about 25 to 30% deficient from a whole of award basis compared to some of the other states.
Some states with an allowance of more than $10,000. For New South Wales, it's zero. They look at the pay rates of other states and the conditions which are attractive enough to lose doctors. You have a city that needs essential workers, there's no argument. But of essential workers, where can they afford to live in Sydney? Police, nurses, doctors. Doctors get paid more, sure, but not all of us do, and it makes it very hard. We need to do something about that. We've got an ability to change it, and I think we have to change it because what we're doing isn't working. Why does it matter? Well, I think it matters for the future of New South Wales and really the future of medicine in New South Wales.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Investing for Doctors podcast. Today, we're going to have a slightly different content and episode because we're focusing on the crisis that is brewing in New South Wales right now, especially amongst the doctors and with New South Wales Health and sort of the pay disputes that are ongoing. Today here, I have with me Lex. Lex, welcome and thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Show. Why don't you just give like a very brief introduction on who you are, what's your specialty, and how you are today and how you got to the situation we are today.
Okay, so look, I'm an emergency specialist that works predominantly in Western Sydney under a couple of different working arrangements. One as a VMO, one as a staff specialist. I've done all of my training in Western Sydney essentially. I spent a bit of time with Sydney LHD, but decided that I ended up working in Western Sydney.
Yep.
I'm one of the ED ASMOF reps when we had a need to sort of coordinate between the different EDs, and so I'm aware of some of the issues that are affecting award reform. And basically one of the reasons I did it is because I actually think that it's quite important, and it is important to see what some of the issues are that are affecting the frontline healthcare workers. Mostly doctors, but I think it's all healthcare workers.
And and nurses are, seem to be in similar disputes at this stage. And I guess before we go into the nitty gritty part, I think we should just do like a general disclaimer. Whatever we're talking about today is our own personal experience. From myself, it's my personal experience. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can speak from my understanding of the issues, which are extremely complicated, and I'm not an industrial lawyer, nor am I an accountant. I'm an emergency doctor, and where any of these opinions are shared, that might be my own personal view of things, and
not representative,
and not necessarily representative of my employers. I'm just here as an ASMOF representative and as an individual with some concerns, but we're not going to go into the nitty gritty of it. We're going to, I think, so it should
beautiful.
Be okay.
So, in your words, we both practice sort of emergency medicine in different scopes and sort of different places. What is your understanding, or how would you explain the problem to someone who's not in New South Wales and perhaps someone who's not in emergency, for instance?
Well, I think it affects us doctors and nurses, not just an emergency, but it's not so much about the pay, it's more about the conditions. So the award is a legal document which defines the remuneration and the conditions of your work. And it's important to get right because your time has value, and while we're all got into this business to help patients, I don't think anyone got into medicine or healthcare because they don't want to help people. We are finding that the state award that governs the employment conditions of doctors in New South Wales is not really addressing the problems we have with workforce and the problems we have with recruitment, the problems we have about extra workload that doctors have to engage with. But all of that really means how effective patient care is delivered to patients. At the end of the day, if we get the award right, we can recruit the doctors we need with the skills we need, we can remunerate them appropriately, and we can provide excellent care to patients. And unfortunately, it's not really kept up with the way medicine's practiced today.
Yeah.
And I think it's affecting how many doctors we can recruit to New South Wales.
Yeah.
And subsequently, how much care patients can possibly get within the public hospital system.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's sort of centered around the whole system and how the system is able to cope with the evolving nature of medicine, and also the incentive structures to actually get the manpower and the human resources to actually staff that system.
Yeah, and also protections that individuals aren't putting themselves at risk through working too many hours because everyone's got a limit, but also protecting patients because you wouldn't really have a situation. Medicine and the airline industry are often compared. There's a reason for that. If you know it, that's good. If you don't, it doesn't matter. But pilots have a limit on how many hours they can be flying for.
And how many customers they have on the plane for the physical size.
And how many people are on the plane.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exist for healthcare. If we draw a similar comparison, you might have a doctor who's been awake for 32 hours. They're getting on board a plane. It's got twice the amount of people it should have on it, and one engine's out. That wouldn't fly in the aviation industry, but
I think any one of those things it
healthcare,
wouldn't fly.
in healthcare, we're seeing increasing wait times in the emergency departments on the elective list from BHI data. And I think part of that is increased demand, but we don't have the workforce to address that.
Yeah. So let's reflect on how the disparity between pay, for instance, right? I think it's often quoted is about 25 to 30% sort of deficient from a whole of a ward basis compared to some of the other states.
As more reference that everyone should know, particularly if you're not a consultant, but I think it's relevant for all of us, and that's New South Wales juniordocs.com.au. And that has a comparison table of pay at different levels between different states. But I think if you look at that, you also need to look at the things like the study allowance that other states get, but also the access to study leave, which in some cases is 25 days thereabouts for some states with an allowance of, I think it's more than $10,000 for some states, but for New South Wales it's zero. And your study allowance study leave is 7 days. And I think if you're training and you're training to be a consultant, whatever specialty that is, that's a big thing. It's already expensive to be a practicing doctor with your indemnity, with your APRA fees, with your college fees. At least that addresses some of the costs. Sure, you can claim some of it back on tax, but it's a bit difficult to pony up the money when you've already got all these other bills and you're having...
And cost of living as well, because, if you're on call for a specialty, technically you need to be within 30 minutes of the hospital. And if you are working in a very inner city hospital, the cost of rent there is astronomical.
Well, I mean, I recall an article recently that talked about how much income you'd have to work in to live in, to rent in Sydney, and it was about you'd need to be on 120,000 a year, and that exceeds that of most of the junior rates of pay, certainly the first couple of years, without augmenting it with a locum job or something like that. And that's a problem because these are essential workers, they're our future, and you've got a lot of time and energy that we expend to train junior doctors. I mean that in terms of interns to, say, senior residents. And then all of that might just be lost when they look at the pay rates of other states and the conditions which are attractive enough to lose doctors.
So, one of the analogies that I've used is that unless you've got a really, really, really good reason to stay in New South Wales, right? I think a lot of the talent has just been flowing to Victoria, to Queensland, Perth. That pays way better. Is that what you found?
Look, yes, but it also depends on where the hospital is. We'll just look at in general terms first. So, I mean, intern pay in Queensland is higher than New South Wales. New South Wales is dead last. It does change around the middle grade senior resident to registrar, and it floats around. But the one thing to draw your attention to is it sort of peaks at Reg Year 4, so fourth year of being a registrar. But most training programs are much longer than that. So you don't actually get incremental changes in your pay, whereas other states
go up to 10,
go up to 10.
Yeah.
So you're sort of limited, years two, the rough thing is years 3 to 4 are roughly about the same. But after that, you're behind and you keep losing ground.
Yeah.
And if you're in a training program that is longer, okay, sure, you might have certain places that are accredited, depending on your college, that might dictate where you have to go. But if you're not, let's say emergency medicine, market forces are at play here. And if you can't afford to get a mortgage to buy in Sydney, you can barely afford to rent. What's the incentive in staying? You might have family, you might like the city.
Yeah, the beach, but
you might like the beach,
so
but that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think you see this because the further out from urban centres you go, the more difficult recruitment. So ASIM talks about, there's an ASIM guide to hospitals, and I believe the last one that came out was 23, 24. There's 70 they publicise that there's 70 registrars at Royal North Shore. I think RPA is similar numbers. But the further west you go, it drops off a cliff.
7-0.
7-0.
Wow. Okay, so, are you serious?
Last time I looked, that was in the ASIM hospital guide for North Shore and for RPA. Now, why is that so? Well, I guess they're more appealing. They've got a higher level of staffing compared to
pass rates
other places. Pass rates are good.
Not as bad.
Bottom line, it comes down to the conditions seem to be better. Okay, maybe it's close to the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, we know NHS people, ex-NHS doctors tend to gravitate to Prince of Wales. It's close to Bondi. Hey, I can understand that. Yep. I'm not a beach person. But the appeal of other places, other hospitals is less. What else has it got?
Oh, yeah. And I think those are pretty much the only few hospitals who actually have a full complement of registrars for.
Yeah, and when Ministry was asked in the ASMOF negotiation period that had been going on for a while, which New South Wales Ministry negotiators withdrew from, they were asked the question, well, how many doctors have we lost interstate? And the answer they were given was, we don't know, we don't collect that data. I guess that would be an important thing to know, wouldn't it? I mean, you would think they would keep track of that, but perhaps they don't.
I think, it sounds like that information could potentially be collected through APRA if we manage to get that. But
I think you could, and I think perhaps they might know, but perhaps there's not an incentive to do that. I don't know, but that was the line that was given. I don't think that's plausible, but that's what was said. So, okay, well, I looked at it into one hospital in Western Sydney and became aware of some of the numbers because someone was doing the numbers at the LHD level, and it was about 30% of residents had resigned in their mid-year after they had their full registration, of which mostly they went interstate, some were international, went overseas, but that's a huge number. That's 30%.
Yeah.
And when you're starting from a lower base in the first place because they had trouble recruiting to the further west you go, that's a real problem. Now, why is that? Well, it's supply and demand, isn't it? Like, there are so many positions, they all pay the same, but we know the workload's higher where you're understaffed. Yeah. So your conditions are going to be worse.
And it's a vicious cycle.
And it's a vicious cycle that continues. And that means those remaining have to work harder. And this is the psychiatry argument that was put in the IRC. It needs to be addressed. There needs to be something to address that. And ultimately, why are they leaving? They can't afford to live in Sydney, or they find that the conditions and pay are better interstate. We need to address that.
So, I'll give you a bit of my personal experience throughout all this because I've been, I guess, an emergency CMO or locum, whatever you call me these days, for for 10 years now. And I've actually, because as a locum, I go to the places where I'm needed the most. And I remember going to a regional hospital in New South Wales where they would require, I believe, 8 registrars to safely staff the emergency department. And they had 1 full-time person there.
The ASIM, I think it's G23 or 27, there's a document on appropriate staffing per number of presentations to a hospital level, which includes some variations if you have trouble with recruitment, exist. And it's not many hospitals outside of the inner city hospitals that really are hitting those numbers. And unfortunately, the biggest population growth is not in the inner city. It's the further west you go. And that's going to affect access to healthcare.
I think we're already seeing that because we both work in different hospitals in Western Sydney. It's I've seen over the years where you would see X amount of presentations, and once it goes over a certain amount, that's a rare day. And now it's pretty much every day.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that the 100 patient in 100 patients at once in the ED was unheard of, or 200 patients a day was an aberration. It was unthinkable.
Yeah.
One of the hospitals I work in, when it was built making the assumption they would see 250 patients a day, and we are knocking on the door of 300 a day.
Yeah.
And we've still got staffing that probably can't meet that demand. Not just in the ED, but you got to remember with the ED, it's
the wards as well.
It's about bed block. It's about, are the patients able to get to a bed, or are they in the ward, or are they not? And that affects the care that's provided to the other patients in the ED as well. It also increases the workload. You end up being much busier, but in terms of what you're achieving, it becomes much harder.
Yeah.
Because one of the things is you're struggling just to find somewhere to treat a patient that might need it.
Or to even see them. This is a problem that I found, is that we are literally putting people in the waiting room when they should be in the bed space. And, the question is, how much of that risk can the system or the profession tolerate?
Yeah, and it's a
difficult to answer question.
It's ever shifting goals about what standard of healthcare as a society we can accept. I mean, it's getting worse. I mean, it's difficult because there's always peaks and troughs with all of this, but at times of peak activity and peak presentations, the options open to you become less and less. And that's when people talk about moral injury and burnout in ED, is that we're being put in an untenable situation that we are as clinicians unable to give the healthcare that we believe people deserve, but because of the limitations of the system, we're unable to provide it to a standard that we would find acceptable. I assume society would find it unacceptable too, but as individuals, that is something that increases the stress that we may feel.
Yeah. And I guess, the bed block issue and the access block issue has always been brought up. And we see, government saying that, we've opened these urgent care centers, we're offloading ED. But on the ground, it doesn't feel like anything has changed. In fact, it's probably gotten worse, hasn't it? Yeah,
I guess the question would be, where's the data? Now, I guess having an urgent care center to offload the ED makes the assumption that the ED is becoming overwhelmed by patients that don't need to be in ED, but there is no other alternative care pathway. Now, we know that sometimes that may be true, but if you're starting a Monday morning with 50 to 60 admitted patients in the ED, that is, they're admitted, they're currently in the ED, an inpatient team has taken over care, but the bed on the ward is not available, and so they're staying in the ED. Well, they're not going to get seen in an urgent care centre or the GP, are they? If they didn't need to be there, they wouldn't be there. But they are being there and they're being admitted. So is the urgent care centre model working? Does it affect things? I'm not sure. It's certainly at most could be considered a mitigation strategy, but I certainly don't think there's any evidence it's big enough to address the issues that we're facing in the ED for the sickest patients where there's the most clinical risk. I'm not against it. I just don't think that necessarily addresses the root cause.
I think I'm almost seeing it as addressing the issue of, the inaffordability to see a GP, and so people leave things at the last minute, and then because they can't get into their GP or they're not willing to pay for a non-bulk billing GP, they end up going to an urgent care center.
Well, I guess the thing is,
it becomes a convenient care center rather than an urgent care center.
I'm not sure. I haven't worked in one, but I guess the question would be, who's staffing the urgent care centers? It's GPs, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's almost like stealing from Paul.
So you've got GP patients who are seeing a GP. Well, it's good.
Yeah.
But does that affect you?
But they're borrowing from one side.
But I'm not sure how that.
Not
sure how that affects you. I think that comes into funding because they get Medicare billings. And the funding of,
and that's not a state issue.
The funding of hospitals is
state
and federal, depending on activity. But activity-based funding is complicated, but it makes the assumption that you can't access as much of it if the patient is discharged from the ED. If they're admitted, but then they never get to a ward and they're discharged before they get to the ward, and a lot of the funding that comes with the Medicare billings at the federal level, I believe, can't be accessed by the hospital.
No, it can't.
It's described as a cycle of poverty. You don't have the funding coming in. You don't have the money coming in. I guess this is investment stuff. You don't have the money coming in, so you're not getting the income from it. So you can't invest in expanding the workforce and things to fix the issues you have. And as a result, you never really get out of that cycle of poverty. And that is I mean, health is complex. It's
but I guess, in a way, a public health care system should not be run like a for-profit enterprise.
No. But I think some of the principles of income and expenditure matter.
Yeah.
But when you can't get them, when you're treating a patient, you're getting the same level of care they would on the ward, but they never get to the ward, so you don't get that income from it, and you've still got the same expenditure associated.
Oh, of course,
you come out behind.
Yeah.
So without a stimulus package or something, or some sort of big investment that is external to that system to address that, you're never going to get ahead.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Oh, that's a huge problem. And also what we're finding is that a lot of new buildings are being built, but the new buildings have the same capacity or even less capacity than the buildings they're aiming to replace.
Yeah.
And then you have the double whammy of not having enough staff to staff them, because now everyone is so far apart and you don't have the visibility anymore.
Look, it's not to say that capital investment in infrastructure isn't important. It is. I mean,
it is important.
Every building has these days, every building has a seemingly finite lifespan, and things need to be done. I mean, you might be driving around in a little MX-5 sports car, so 2-seater, no roof, lovely. You meet a nice girl, things are going well. But then, things progress. You get married and you're planning a kid and she's pregnant. Well, you don't go out and buy a new 2-seater sports car, because where you're going to put the baby, you've got the same problem. You should probably buy something like a Kia Carnival or some sort of sensible car, right? But how many beds have we gained from the capital investment? Not that many. And then the other issue is you still have to...
I don't think we've actually gained any, to be honest, quite frank.
There have been small incremental gains, but they haven't really been staffed enough from day one and open for day one. Because the other thing that matters is what nurses are available to staff them. Because if you build a building but you don't have the staff to fill it, you can't really see the patients that you have that you would otherwise have until you've got that.
And I guess this is where the enterprise bargaining agreement is so important, because if you're not giving people an incentive to stay on and work in New South Wales, you're always going to be at that point where you find it difficult to scale up your workforce.
Yeah, and I guess the thing would be, look, the hospital that's been planned for, only over a decade was at Rouse Hill, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was announced many elections ago at the state level, but there's not much happened there. I still haven't seen any construction that I'm aware of. But even if there was, where would the staff come from?
You can build a building, but you can't put people out of thin air.
If there's still a shortage of doctors and vacant positions in New South Wales as a whole, I mean, how are you going to get extra? How are you going to staff it? Yeah. Look, there's arguments about making our workload or reducing our workload to do doctors doing things only doctors can do, and I think that does have merit. It really does. I mean, offloading tasks to other people that
can do them,
that are less trained and have less ability to address everything, makes sense. But I haven't really seen on the floor that's been a big change.
But where are these people? And who's training them? And there's a leader.
and regardless, we still need to meet the increasing population.
We still need a space.
And we still need the space, and we still need the doctors. It's pretty simple. It's beds and staff. It costs money, but how can you provide the same level of care with fewer beds per capita, fewer staff per capita? It just doesn't add up to me.
And my gut feeling working through the system, because I over the last couple of years, I predominantly work nights, and I've just seen that, the place has gotten from, being a bit unsafe to almost slightly getting dangerous on certain days.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be hard to argue that the amount of risk that's associated with the staffing, particularly on nights, isn't an issue. When I was a registrar towards the end of training, we would normally run 4 registrars that were mostly either within, I'd say, 1 or 2 years of our final exam. Sometimes we had 5.
Wow. Okay.
And now I think we're running 2 in some of the larger Western, larger hospitals in Western
where
Sydney.
I am is 3, and
But I've seen it at 2.
Yeah, I've seen it at 2 too.
And the level,
I've been on those shifts.
And the level of training and experience that those doctors have that are in charge is not as much as it once was either.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? It's complicated. If you look at emergency medicine trainee numbers, it sort of peaked in 2016 and it's on the decline because it's a hard place to work. But also they're going interstate.
Yeah.
When my graduating cohort of close colleagues, around the same time, I think 20% of them said, no, we're going somewhere else. It's just not worth it here. And I guess if you're now in the position you're at your earning potential and you want to get a house, have a kid, form a life, New South Wales isn't a great place to start that. It's a lot more expensive.
Yeah, the houses are easily way more expensive than any other capital cities.
Indeed. And then, tolls and everything else. But, but I digress. But that is hard to mitigate.
Yeah, of course.
Because if it ultimately comes down to that, well, it's the same as the essential worker argument. You have a city that needs essential workers. There's no argument about that. But of essential workers, where can they afford to live in Sydney? Fireys, police, nurses, doctors. Okay, doctors get paid more, sure, but not all of us do, and it makes it very hard. And if you can't afford to live in Sydney as an essential worker, what are we going to do about making it a livable city? Because essential workers can't afford to be here. We need to do something about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. And I remember when in my graduating year, this was like more than 15 years ago now, there were an oversupply of interns in New South Wales. And so there were literally more interns coming out than places available. And so I was one of the, because I was an international student, I had to go interstate. I worked for 2 years in Melbourne, which was fantastic. And my understanding is that last year, I think there were still intern positions that were left unfilled.
Yeah, I don't know at the state level. I know at 3 LHDs, that was definitely the case.
Well, I mean,
before we started, we were behind.
Yeah.
We had, I think there was, for each LHD, it was roughly 10, in some cases 20. Might have been more, but that's what they ended up on. But even if, whatever the number is, we know that we're getting a lot more international medical graduates that are coming into the hospital system, which, okay, great, they can augment to some degree, but
they don't, not all of them stay. That's the problem.
Not all of them stay.
Yeah.
Training can be somewhat challenging as well. I mean, look, some of my colleagues are IMGs at the consultant level, and they're great, and they would say that it was hard for them. It was hard, and I know it's hard at times to train some of them, and some of them are great. After 6 months, they're fantastic. They're like any other human being. Like
you need time to settle down.
Skill set.
Yeah.
But there is a separate workload with training IMGs to work in the state system that is borne by those who are working with them.
Yeah.
And that does mean that some of the clinical care is compromised in some way because you're spending time appropriately supervising, which takes time.
Yeah.
So in some cases, after 6 months, they're fine. In some cases, perhaps they still need that extra level of supervision. But that's represented by APRA's supervision levels.
Yeah.
And there's only so many on the higher supervision scale that a hospital can take at once.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at now. I don't think that's a sustainable future because
of course not. Yeah.
How many countries are we going to take from to get medical positions filled, particularly in New South Wales?
Yeah. And I think that's not a justifiable long-term strategy from the countries that these people are coming from, because like we're basically pillaging their medical workforce with a marginally, not a margin, with a better system here. But then what's going to happen to
I mean,
systems?
There's that ethical argument about a country that where a medical officer has a higher value to that population. We're taking them away because they have higher needs, and we're taking that away. And I mean, that goes into transferring wealth out of one country for the benefit of another. But I guess the British Empire was built on that. So
clearly,
a white man's got history for doing the same thing for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But on the ground, the issue is that is what we're dependent on now.
Yeah.
And we're still not keeping pace with our demand and our positions.
I mean, I look at the place I'm at, the 80% of the evening shift is filled by casuals, locums, and overseas.
Yeah, and they attract a higher rate of pay per hour. Now, admittedly, that's not, with that income, that's taxed at the income tax level and everything else. But if you still look at it, it's still more than the base rate. So we're constantly paying more to fill the roster. And if they're booked on for 3 months, you can't tell me that if we didn't increase the base rate to make it competitive within the state, we wouldn't have had a drain in the first place.
Exactly, because they're easily double, if not triple, the person that they're meant to replace.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got two people with doing the same work with the same responsibilities, but one person is getting paid 3 times what someone else is working on the same day, and that's the regular. What's the incentive to actually sign up to be regular? Well, the hope that you get through training and get to the end, but when the pay rate is competitive with the consultant rate, and you get to pick the days you work, you can understand why a locum lifestyle might actually be preferable to some people. I mean, and it's no different at the consultant level, to be honest. I mean, I get emails from a couple of locum agencies. I don't know how they got a hold of me, and $3,500 a day for a 10-hour shift. Well, usually 10-hour shift. That's a lot more than the base VMO rate in New South Wales. It's probably 30% higher.
And much higher than the staffy rate.
And much higher than the staffy rate, The staffy rate's complex, but...
Yeah, because there's all these other additional things that's lumped into it.
And the non-clinical roles that is part of it, which in the award for ED physicians is normally about 25%.
Yeah. But again, you got to like that stuff if you want to do it.
And also that non-clinical work, okay, it's not clinical, but it's got to be done.
Yeah, of course. And
it
could be
and
really horrible things.
And if it didn't need to be done by the consultants, then they would get someone else to do it. In some places, that sort of work is billable as a VMO. It's certainly a drop down as a billable hour on on the VMO billings, the way they work it. So they know it's there, and it has been done in certain places. So there is a cost with it. And if you're a VMO, it's the same rate. So if you're a staffer, you can just say, well, okay, it's in there too.
And I guess, we're not even talking about the terms or the value, the numbers in all the EBA, but by and large, it's just a vastly inferior contract to working in any other state.
Look,
I mean, is there any sort of silver lining to any of this stuff? As in our current award. I mean,
I don't see anything in our award
that is better than anyone else.
That is better than anyone else. Okay, maybe you could argue for staff specialists with access to TESL, which is the study leave allowance, which I think is around $40,000 per year, but it accumulates up to 70. But after 3 years, it goes back to 0. Because that's reimbursed, and the way it's reimbursed is you essentially are not the one paying tax on it. So you do have access to more monetary value of study leave compared to other states. For argument's sake, Queensland pays $21,000, but they just give it to you. But does that matter when you can claim it back as an expenditure at the end of the financial year on tax?
Not really.
It's a cash flow thing. It probably comes out slightly ahead, but it's not as easy to access as you want, because it can be denied if there's a clinical need to be on the floor. It's like other leave, you have to balance the clinical coverage that can be provided for a group of doctors.
And I think a lot of people have accumulated so much and they have no ability to take it due to clinical need.
Yeah, and why is that so? Well, if we don't have the doctors in New South Wales to cover each other in the first place, how can you possibly take the leave so the money just goes nowhere? So it's complicated. I don't personally feel that's a better way of doing it, but I do see where it can be of benefit to certain people under certain circumstances. But that would be the only thing that could be argued that is superior in New South Wales that I can see.
Yeah, but I've got a really terrible thing, which I think is a moral injury, is the way our salary packaging is treated.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're the only state that actually taxes our salary sacrifice salary packaging deal. Yeah. No other state does that.
Yeah. Well, they so for those that are not in New South Wales, what New South Wales Health does is that, for example, if you package $10,000 and you had you were at the 47% bracket, so you should get $4,700 back. New South Wales Health actually will charge you an administrative fee of 50% of your benefit.
So essentially, of the benefits you get by salary sacrificing, 50% of the benefit goes to government.
Yeah, and they charge you for that.
And they charge you for it, which no other state does. I think that's a bit rough. In terms of pay rates, I think other states are better because they actually remunerate better generally for out of hours work.
Yeah.
So for evening shifts, you get 12.5%. For night shifts, I don't know what the rate is because it's been a while, but
it's I think 25%.
I think it's 25% sure, and weekend, like Saturdays, Sundays is not much. But look at the Queensland or the Victoria rates and you go, wow, that's a fair bit more. So there's, for remuneration for unsociable hours, I think other states are better.
Yeah.
It's particularly for JMOs, CMOs. For staff is a bit complex with ED, with the ED allowance, but we'll come to that. But I don't think that you get incentivized enough to do a night shift or an evening shift compared to other states.
Yeah, because it's not actually in the staff specialist contract. If you don't consider the loading and all that incentives stuff in there.
Yeah, so it gets complicated there. Now, there's not evening shift loadings for VMOs either. There's, I think there's weekends and public holidays, obviously, but you can quite easily Google state award medical officers and pick the state of your choice and have a look through it and just...
All of it's more attractive.
As long as it's a searchable PDF, you can look at overtime rates and rates of pay and things like that. But for staff specialists, there's no overtime pay. So anything done on a Saturday morning by an inpatient staff specialist is not actually paid because you can't bill for that. If you're a VMO, you can, but not if you're a staff specialist. That's a bit weird, but there you go. Recall. So the staff specialist cardiologist that has to come in at 2 a.m. to do a PCI on the heart attack patient. Sorry, there's no payment for that. That's a problem.
Yeah. It makes people not want to do on call because there's no financial incentive.
It's either not do on call or do it as a VMO because then you get paid for it. But then, you get called, I think if you're a VMO and you get called, you bill for 4 hours, whatever it is. And that rate might be significant.
Yeah.
I'm not against VMOing. I think both have their merit within.
Both have their place in the system.
With it, and I do both. So, but I think there needs to be some sort of recognition of the work done that can only be done by a certain group of people when they're coming in at night to help out. Now, I think, yes, they do have an obligation to do it. That's part of their job, but we need to recognize that.
Yeah.
Just like all the healthcare workers went through COVID and pushed ourselves really hard, we're still doing stuff like that now that people just don't know about. And I think letting it go without payment means we're undervaluing ourselves. Yes, we do it because we want to do the right thing by the patient. But the problem is that still needs to be remunerated.
Yeah. And that goes, Goodwill only goes so far, I think.
Goodwill don't pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're getting punched left, right, and center by bills, expenses, school fees, and all that sort of thing, it quickly adds up.
Yeah. I mean, we're not a charity ultimately.
No.
So that is a problem.
Yeah.
In that way, I don't think the New South Wales award is pretty good. Is particularly good. The draft amendments that were filed by the New South Wales government with the IRC included, redeploying consultants to areas of need at the will of the employer.
Yeah.
A 25% penalty rate for night shifts, so within the hours of 12 and 7, I think it was. But I think that doesn't come enough.
I mean,
let's say you're an anaesthetist and you're being told you need the emergency list is too long, you need to come in and do the night shift between 12 and 7 to get through the cases. Well, if you do that, you're getting it for 25% on already quite a low rate, but anyway. But what if you had a VMO list at a private hospital the next day? You suddenly can't do that. It would be unsafe to do that, or at least it could be unsafe depending on the situation. So to do the right thing, you're taking a pay cut. Ultimately, there's less money in your pocket because you can't really do both. That's a problem.
Yeah.
And the criteria around when that could happen are changed from clinical need as defined by the employer as opposed to there's an actual clinical need. So this is, a lot of...
So it's an administrator who gets to make that call.
Yeah, and I guess it's what's the threat, it can change from a threshold that there is a sick patient that needs your particular skill set that is not available in the hospital.
To just BAU because we need it.
There's too many patients in the waiting room.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's good enough.
No.
Because if there's too many patients in the waiting room and you're an emergency doctor, you're not going to mitigate that. There's still no bed. There's still no bed flow. There's still bed block. Whether I'm there or not, it's not going to change. I can't magically get a bed. The solution to that would be to open more beds, have more nurses, have hospitals that fund it. It is not to have an ED consultant there to mitigate the risk that's created by bed block. Because that's no different to the registrar or anyone else.
I don't think that's will make.
So I don't think that's a compelling argument.
Yeah.
And I think that there have been instances I'm aware of where ED physicians have been called by some someone in executive to come into a hospital because there's too many patients in the waiting room or there's too many patients have turned up at once. But that is not what the intent of on-call. It is to provide the clinical care and skill set needed for certain things, not for patient load. Otherwise,
if you look at it right now, you just call everyone back.
Yeah, what do we do? Send them home if there's no one in the ED, but then bring them all back 5 minutes later when 10 patients.
It
just doesn't make sense to me.
You need to staff things better.
It's not a solution, and then I don't understand how it could possibly be workable.
So I think we've gone through nearly all of the problems that we're facing from an emergency and also from a profession perspective, and how the award is not allowing us to do what we really need to do and retain the staff.
Yeah, I mean, in real terms, there are advanced training positions in specialties that cannot be filled in Western Sydney because they are not getting applicants for it, because it is not appealing to take that role in New South Wales when there are the same job in other states that pay more.
They pay more, better conditions, everything.
Exactly. Now, there are some that really you don't get to choose. If you're in the surgical pathway, anesthetic pathway, you have to be in a particular training position, and they do fill up, and you get moved around. And that happens. So we see a lot of movement between Victoria and New South Wales. But ones that have come to Victoria are like, I'm getting paid 20% less and I'm doing this more work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's a problem. Yeah. Because then they don't want to come here. And then if we can't even recruit to a position where those requirements don't apply, where they don't have to be in a specific training position, well, that's obviously
I think that's the canary in the coal mine.
I think that's the problem. And then ED training, because ED being the canary in the coal mine, to my mind, where all of the problems of the hospital manifest, we're seeing reduced numbers of people entering the training program. These things accelerate quickly. For psychiatry, same thing. If the psychiatry workforce does truly leave or goes to a VMO model.
Well, none of the registrars can hang around.
Well, none of the registrars, my understanding is that you need to have, for every 2 psychiatry trainees, you need 1 staff specialist, because VMOs wouldn't generally be employed in the role of supervising them. But the numbers don't add up, and we're going to run out of trainees, and it's a bit of a death spiral for the workforce. And we've already seen the effect of the psychiatry crisis on other fields in medicine. And I'm worried that is going to continue into other fields as well. Now, we've got time to change it. We've got an ability to change it. And I think we have to change it, because what we're doing isn't working. Why does it matter? Well, I think it matters for the future of New South Wales and really the future of medicine in New South Wales.
Absolutely.
And I think it's worth having a look at some of the documents yourself. I think it's worth coming to your own conclusions and deciding, is that something that you are okay with or not? I don't know that we've had much traction with presenting the arguments to ministry. I don't think the mutual gains bargaining that occurred between ministry and the union has really achieved much, and they walked away from it. And then through 3 extra conditions on our old award that don't really add up to anything except being worse. I don't think that's going to help the problems we have.
No, and I don't believe it will. And I think this is where we're stuck. We're in this situation we are right now. We are on basically the precipice of.
We're certainly at a position where some big decisions need to be made about what happens next.
Yeah. So I'm not going to speak for the union, and just watch this space, I guess. And hopefully we get to a end result that is mutually beneficial.
We have to. I mean, ultimately, I don't think the people of New South Wales would accept
anything less.
Accept a situation where the care they're getting and the amount of doctors to look after them is less than interstate.
Yeah.
I don't think that is something that anyone would ever want. So we have to do something about that.
I think with that, we're going to call it a day.
Sounds
good. Lex, for having a chat with us. And
Anytime,
I think we presented a lot of good arguments to why the government should come to the table and try and help us fix this problem.
I think ultimately that is something we share. We do want to do right by the people in New South Wales. It's just how we do that. But I think there's a lot to unpack beyond that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Too much for the 2 of us today.
Too much for 45 minutes. Cheers, man.
Thank you. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. The information and opinions shared are not intended as personal financial advice. The content presented should not be relied upon for making financial, investment, or other decisions. Listeners are strongly encouraged to seek the advice of qualified financial or legal professionals before making any financial decisions. While we aim to provide valuable and accurate information, we make no guarantees regarding the completeness or accuracy of the content. Any reliance on the information provided is done at your own risk.